We arrived at Gas Street Basin around noon on the 28th of August. We did a final bit of tidying up before I walked over to Birmingham's New Street Railway Station to meet our new guests, Ron and Judy Etheridge from Reno, Nevada. They definitely got the prize for arriving with the least amount of luggage, especially as they'll be on the boat for the next 21 days. They brought some liqueur chocolates with them, and here we are toasting each other for a successful cruise before having dinner on board and turning in for the night. Sunday was market day, so Pat and Judy took off to browse around the stalls while I showed Ron all the ins and outs of Claire Justine. The reason for doing this was because Ron and Judy will be cruising on their own for 2 weeks. But more about this later on. After everyone was back on board, we pulled away from Gas Street Basin and retraced Saturday's cruise along the Worcester and Birmingham Canal. After 4 miles, the aroma of chocolate became quite strong, and we were forced to pull over and check out Cadbury's World. The tour around the factory cost £4.50. It was interesting and worth the money, especially as we got to try some samples. In the afternoon we cruised to Kings Norton Junction and made a left turn onto the Stratford Canal. That was back to new waters for us. Ron is taking us through Kings Norton Stop Lock with its unusual wooden guillotine gates. Stop locks were used by canal companies to protect their water from other canal companies. Ron gets to try his hand at taking Claire Justine through a tunnel. This one is the 352-yard long Brandwood Tunnel. We cruised on for about 6 miles after the tunnel and moored up by the Drawbridge pub in Shirley, and that's where we had some dinner. It was a nice morning on Monday as we made our way along the Stratford Canal. It was lock free for about 5 miles, and then we started our descent of the Lapworth flight. From Lapworth Tot Lock to Stratford upon Avon there are a total of 53 locks. They're somewhat unique because they have 2 bottom gates instead of the usual single gate, and they are interspersed with these ornate cast iron split bridges. I think it was at the Boat Inn that we stopped for a roast beef dinner before mooring up in a delightful spot in the pound between locks 15 and 16. It was a lovely evening, so we set up the table on the bank for refreshments. Night time on the Stratford Canal. It was a bit overcast in the morning, but it burned off before we got underway. No, I didn't come down the bywash at lock 16, I was just playing around. Actually, reversing for this photo opportunity was most likely not the smartest thing to do, because all sorts of things can gather around the base of the waterfall. See what I mean? This is Ron going down the weed hatch to get some foreign objects off the prop. Actually, I don't think we did pick anything up at lock 16 though. It was at Kingswood Junction that we made the final decision to head for Stratford-upon-Avon rather than go down the Grand Union Canal towards Warwick. This canal is another one that ranks up near the top of our list of most scenic canals. Judy soon got the hang of how to steer a 60-foot narrowboat, although she preferred to do the locks rather than steer. Another interesting feature of this canal are the barrel roof cottages. One theory is that they were built by the men who constructed the canal tunnels and were designed this way because they could be built easily and quickly. The fact is, no one really knows who designed them or why a barrel roof was chosen. There was lots of canal ware for sale at this one. Seeing all those roses and castles obviously got Pat back to doing her canal ware. The Buckby can is coming along nicely and she's started on the stone hot water bottle. Well, it looks like autumn is just around the corner. We stopped at the Fleur de Lis in Lowersford for a pint and then decided to have a late lunch there. I had some kind of kidney dish, but I have to say I didn't like it. On our way down to Preston Bagot, Fly Deluxe, we stopped for a Cornish cream tea at the Haven Tea Rooms. The reason for the split in the bridge is so that the towing rope does not have to be unhitched from the horse. And here's Ron showing some interested bystanders how it works. After passing the Anglo-Welsh boatyard at Wootton Wayward, we moored up in open country just before the Oddlock. It was a full day of cruising, but very enjoyable. Just beyond our overnight mooring was Edgestone Aqueduct, a 200-yard long iron trough on brick piers that carries the canal over a shallow valley. Like two other aqueducts on the Stratford, Yarningdale and Wootton Wayward, the towpath is at eye level with the canal. This shot of Ron taking us across the aqueduct gives you a better view of the sunken towpath. We only cruised a mile or so before pulling over to spend some time at Mary Arden's cottage. Mary Arden was the mother of William Shakespeare. We had a great time. The guides were very informative and there was also a very interesting falconry demonstration. Once underway, Pat and Judy fried up some bacon, tomatoes and eggs for a nice lunch on the front deck. It was a gorgeous afternoon as we took our time cruising the 4 miles and 16 locks down to Bancroft Basin. However, it was getting dark and we had to use our headlight as we approached the low headroom bridge number 69. This is the entrance into the basin. Now here's what happened. The flour cauldron got knocked off the roof and Pat grabbed it through the side hatch as it went splash into the canal. But it was too heavy for her to lift back on board and she nearly followed it into the cut. With Ron holding onto her legs, she finally managed to rescue it. The next thing that happened is one of the patrons at the Canalside pub shouted out, "Your tilapin's not gonna make it!" And he was right. Fortunately, I just managed to pull it out in time. After all that excitement, we did finally make it into the basin and found a mooring spot. Okay, is Pat still looking for the flour cauldron that got knocked off the roof last night, or is she looking for leaks? When Ron and Judy joined us, I mentioned that they would be cruising aboard Claire Justine for 21 days. This is as good a time as any to tell you why. Pat and I will be leaving the boat in their capable hands for the next 2 weeks while we soak up some sun in the Greek islands. Ron and I went into town this morning to get some money, and I needed to get our train tickets to London. We did find out that because of the recent rains, the water in the basin was exceptionally high and the headroom under Bridge 69 was only 73 inches. One more inch rise in the water level and we would have had to have opened the lock that empties into the River Avon to get into the basin. As I wanted to say that I'd cruise the River Avon, we decided to go through the lock for a short river cruise. Ron and Judy had quite an audience as they took Claire Justine through the lock and onto the river. We pulled into a boatyard to get a pump out. That was £8.50, 10 gallons of diesel at £1.30 a gallon, and £35 licence that is required to cruise the Avon. We came back up the lock into the basin and found a nice mooring spot right outside the Royal Shakespeare Theatre. Ron and Judy will be cruising the River Avon to Tewkesbury, the River Severn to Worcester, and then the Worcester and Birmingham Canal back to Gas Street Basin. A total distance of 90 miles and 77 locks. On the afternoon of Thursday the 2nd of September, we waved goodbye to Ron, Judy and Claire Justine. We walked over to the railway station to catch our 3:55 train to Paddington. We left for Greece the following day. Ron and Judy's travels are not included in this story, nor are their miles and locks included in any of the numbers. They did have some nasty weather and the River Avon went into flood while they were on it. On one night some morons drove a car into the river just in front of the boat's bow. Then of course they had to handle all those locks on the Worcester and Birmingham Canal all on their own. To make matters worse, Judy was a bit under the weather. At Diglas Basin they planted some of our weather-beaten flowers. I'm sure they have some fond and not so fond memories of their 2-week cruise. No more 90-degree sunshine for us. On Sunday the 19th, Karen drove us up to Birmingham to rejoin Ron and Judy. We drove around a bit before finding Gas Street Basin, but when we did, there was a pristine Claire Justine with a beautiful rooftop garden. Just after we arrived, the goose was having trouble because she'd swallowed some fishing line and got it tangled around her tongue. A fellow boater, Jonathan, joined us in the rescue operation. After that bit of excitement, we stayed up fairly late catching up on Ron and Judy's news before turning in for the night. The following morning we said our goodbyes and they took off for the railway station. We spent Monday in Birmingham and visited the museum and art gallery. There's no question we're back in England. It started to pour down as we made our way back to the boat. We had dinner on board, lit the fire, yes, lit the fire in September, and settled back into boat life. After breakfast we left Birmingham under sunny skies and once again cruised the Worcester and Birmingham Canal. Made a left turn at Kings Norton Junction onto the Stratford Canal and under the guillotine gates of the stock block. The sun didn't last long. By the afternoon it was bucketing down, so we called it quits just before the Lapworth flight. On Wednesday we came down the 20 locks okay, and most were set in our favour. At lock number 4 another group of morons had taken a car for a joyride and then dumped it in the canal. What is up with these idiots? We had to wait while they craned it out. Here we are back at Kingswood Junction, but this time we're going to go on the Grand Union Canal towards Warwick. There's no doubt the Dordhams arrived as we approached Turner's Green Bridge in Rowington. We moored up early just beyond the bridge and waited for the Tom of the Woods pub to open. We had dinner and a couple of drinks there before returning to the boat to watch some TV. It was very foggy when we woke up on Thursday morning, but it quickly burnt off. Well, it looks like we have porridge for breakfast. We didn't go far today, just a few yards so that we could have a mooring with a nicer view. We had a friend join us on our short cruise. He, or is it a she, was really different. Black and emerald feathers with a cute top knot. We spent the whole day at our new mooring, cleaning and polishing the brass so that we'd have the ship all shipshape for our next group of visitors. Once again we lit the fire and had a cosy evening watching TV. It was really foggy on Friday morning, but we got underway right after breakfast. Pat took us through the 433-yard long Shrewley Tunnel. The towpath goes over the tunnel and it has its own miniature tunnel for about 40 yards. We moored up by Hatton Station Bridge number 56, it's also called Glebe Bridge, and we eagerly awaited the arrival of our next guests. It was the family, Mandy, Billy, Steve and Sammy and Roz. Sammy looks quite a bit older than she did when we said goodbye to the family at Reno Airport 6 months ago. She obviously has English blood in her because she is one of Robin Hood's merry men. They arrived around 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and after we unloaded their gear, Steve and I drove the car to near Birmingham Airport and got a taxi back to the boat. We had dinner on board and caught up on all the family news. We did have a phone call today from our house sitter, Ray Peretti, to let us know that our dog lady is no longer with us. After Steve and I got back to the boat, we untied and began cruising with the family. Within a few minutes of taking off, they were introduced to locking, the 21 double-wide locks on the Hatton flight. Steve had no problem getting the hangar steering a 60-foot narrowboat. And Mandy became an expert at working the candlestick paddle gear. But as you'll see from the next few shots, the real expert was Sammy. It does take muscle power to do the Hatton locks. We arrived in Warwick in the afternoon and were fortunate enough to get a nice secure mooring in the basin at the end of the Saltersford Arm. These moorings are managed by the Saltersford Trust, and the custodian kindly gave us the key to the laundry room. We put on a load, then walked into town and had a nice dinner at the Punch Bowl. We got back fairly late, put on another load of laundry and then hit the sack. We were all up early on Sunday and headed off for an enjoyable day at Warwick Castle. While Ros took Sammy to the Doll Museum, we walked around town. This is the Lord Leicester Hospital, built in 1571. We all met up at St Mary's Church, which has the remains of a medieval ducking stool in its crypt. We couldn't find a grocery store in town that was open, so ended up having soup and sandwich on board for dinner. Afterwards we played Liverpool until midnight. For those of you who don't know, Liverpool is a card game. We were up early again on Monday. Steve and I took the boat for a pump out while the rest of the crew went shopping. They staggered back with 12 bags of groceries and I was £120 poorer. By noon it was time to leave the Saltersford Arm and continue our journey along the Grand Union Canal and up the Boscote Flight of Locks. It started to rain in the afternoon, so we moored up outside the Two Boats Inn in Long Itchington. We had dinner in the pub, gammon steak with lots of veggies. All the meals were very good. Back on the boat we lit the fire because it was getting chilly and then played one game of Liverpool before turning in. Tuesday was more locks as we ascended the Stockton flight on our way to Napton Junction. At Napton Junction, or Wigram's Turn as it's also known, we made a left turn and started retracing part of the cruise we had with the Phoenix up to Braunston. As I mentioned before, this section of the system is shared by the Grand Union and Oxford Canal. At Braunston we headed east and started ascending the 6 Braunston locks. We wanted to moor up below Lock 3 so we could visit the Admiral Nelson, but we couldn't get close enough into the bank, so continued going up the flight. We ended up mooring between the top lock and the tunnel. We got underway sometime before noon on Wednesday and Steve took us through the 2,042 yard long Braunston Tunnel that was built in 1796. Coming up are a few shots of the family in the tunnel. A short distance after the tunnel we pulled over for a lunchtime pint. We walked up a steep hill to the village of Welton and the White Horse pub. We were pleased to find that the pub had bar skittles. This is a popular game in Northamptonshire, but some of the pubs no longer have it. We spent a good part of the afternoon enjoying quite a few games. You'll never guess who was the winner. By the way, the yellow disc Sammy is about to toss is called a cheese. There's an interesting gravestone in the village graveyard. It's always a challenge on the canals to get by the lazy old heron, and once again we didn't make it this time. After we left Welton we reached Norton Junction, descended the Buckby Locks and moored up in open country by Brockhall Park. I'm going to digress at this point in the story and go back over the route we've just cruised the last couple of days. But this time it will be a flashback to July of 1980 and our cruise aboard narrowboat Seamus with the Fenton family. Leaving Long Buckby. Norton Junction. Braunston Tunnel. Descending Braunston Locks. A pint at the Admiral Nelson. A towpath on the way to Napton Junction, pun intended. Descending the Boscote Flight. Cruising the Grand Union to Warwick. A toast to a trip down memory lane. Okay, back to September 1993. We left Brockhall Park sometime in the morning of the 30th. Just had to take a shot at narrowboat Nevada tied up at Waterways Services in Whedon. Little did we know at the time that we will be back here in the not too distant future. Now for a few shots of the family as we cruise down the Grand Union to Stoke Bruin under sunny skies. Captain Sammy takes the tiller. Oh no, more tunnel shots. This time we're going through the 3,057 yard long Blissworth Tunnel. At the time we went through it was the longest canal tunnel open to navigation in Britain. It does have an interesting history. The Grand Junction Canal was opened in 1800 with the exception of the tunnel. The first attempt at getting the tunnel through failed, and a tramway was built over Blissworth Hill linking the two termini. Boats had to unload their goods onto horse-drawn wagons, which were then pulled over the hill and reloaded into boats at the other terminus. A second attempt at the tunnel was more successful, and it opened in 1805, but the boats had to be legged through. This is part of the casing that was used in repairing the tunnel in 1982. Here is Sammy Hood guarding our overnight mooring at Stoke Bruin. In the afternoon we visited the Waterways Museum and walked around the village. I'm not sure if we had dinner on board or at the boat inn. Pat did get a bit lax keeping a log up to date while the family were with us. It's Friday the 1st of October and the family's last day aboard Claire Justine. Stoke Bruin is perhaps the best example of a canal village in Britain. The attractive canal-side warehouses and cottages are built mostly of the local Blissworth stone. We stayed at the B&B behind us in 1992. That was when we were touring the countryside looking at narrowboats. This is a boat scale that was used to determine the toll that should be paid for carrying goods on the canal. Stoke Bruin's an ideal place to take a family photograph. Actually, the next shot will be a better one. Bye bye Stoke Bruin. As you can see, the weather turned really nasty as we cruised the 7 miles and 8 locks down to Wolverton. But Mandy didn't care what the weather was like. Sun, rain or hail, she loved to be at the tiller. Those wussy fishermen have to have an umbrella. Real canal people would never be seen dead with an umbrella while steering. Mandy takes us across the Wolverton aqueduct that carries the canal over the River Ouse. We moored up for our final night with the family just beyond Wolverton near New Bradwell Winding Hole. It was time for our daily ritual of sherry and fruitcake, and a toast to a safe journey home. On Saturday morning it was just a short cruise back to Wolverton railway station. We even persuaded Billy to take the tiller. We tied up by the railway station, and after hugs and kisses it was time to say goodbye. Hi-ho, 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 off to Reno we go. From the 28th of August to the 2nd of October we cruised 108 miles and went through 144 locks. But remember, we did have that 2-week sabbatical to Greece when Ron and Judy cruised 90 miles and went through 77 locks on their journey from Stratford back to Gas Street Basin. To date we've now travelled 1,113 miles and been through 912 locks. The boat was definitely a lot quieter after the family caught their train on Saturday morning. After they left, we cruised up to Cosgrove Marina for a pump out, but they didn't have the facilities, so had to head south to Milton Keynes. We got to the new marina at 5:50, just in time to get a much needed pump out for £7. No, this chamber pot adorned with our guest names was not included in the pump out service. It's part of our hand-painted canalware that includes the butley can, the 2 flower cauldrons, table coasters, the stone hot water bottle and the flat iron. We moored up outside a pub, but it was a dull and rainy evening, so decided to stay on board, light the fire and have a nice stew for dinner. On Sunday morning we called Pat's cousin Jeff and his wife Peggy and arranged to meet them at the Three Locks pub in Salisbury at noon. It took longer than expected to get there because the fishermen were out in full force and there was a lot of traffic on the canal. That meant slow going in the open stretches as well as going through the locks. We ended up being an hour late, but Jeff and Peg were there to meet us. After a pizza lunch we went for a 2-hour cruise to Stoke Hammond before returning to Salisbury, where they said goodbye. It was another gorgeous day on Monday as we made our way to Leighton Buzzard. We didn't stop at the Globe in Linslade, but this is where we had a great meal during our 1985 cruise. Pat's cousin Rodney, who's an artist, did a very nice watercolour painting from this photo. And 18 years later the full-size painting still has a place of honour in our house. We moored up in Leighton Buzzard right outside a Tesco's store with a laundromat only a short distance away. That was very convenient. After picking up some groceries and doing a bit of laundry, we got fish and chips for supper on board. It was rock salmon and was very good and on par with Busy Lizzie's in Skipton. It was another nice sunny morning as we did the last bit of shopping at Tesco's before getting underway. By noon it had turned nasty and we managed to moor up just before it started to belt down with thunder and lightning. It was so windy there were white horses on the canal. Then all of a sudden the sun came out, the wind dropped and it turned into a beautiful afternoon as we cruised to just after Slapton Lock. On the way we stopped to replenish our supplies of blackberries. On Wednesday the 6th we had visitors from Arizona. It was Chet, the husband of Pat's niece Eileen, and his parents Bill and Daphne. We had lunch at the Carpenter's Arms in Slapton, and to this day the steak and kidney pie ranks as one of the best we've ever had. It was homemade and the portions were so large that Pat and I split a meal and had no room left for dessert. It was served with all sorts of veggies and potatoes in individual tureens. While we were having lunch, their rental car was broken into. The vandals smashed a window and stole an ice bag. After calling the rental company to report the incident, Pat, Chet and I returned to the boat and Bill and Daphne took off to go back to Luton. Chet stayed with us for the night and we cruised a couple of miles and went through 5 locks to Ivinghoe. We had supper on board and in the evening Chet told us the sad news that he and Eileen were separating after 22 years of marriage. The next morning Bill and Daphne arrived to pick up Chet and we had lunch at the Duke of Wellington before they took off. This lunch was nowhere near as good as yesterday's. It was a sunny afternoon, but we decided to stay put and relaxed reading books and painting canalware. As usual, it started to pour down in the evening. It was another nice sunny morning on Friday as we left Ivanhoe for Calrose Marina. We hadn't had any responses to our ad in Waterways World to sell Claire Justine for £40,000, so we wanted to talk to them about selling her after we returned to the States in November. After checking the boat out, the broker, Paul, said he'd list her, but for no more than £35,000. We were not interested. However, he was nice enough to let us leave the boat moored in the marina while we spent the night at Jeff and Peg's place in Dunstable. We spent a nice evening chatting with them and spent some time with Pat's Aunt Ida. The next morning Jeff drove us back to the boat. We only cruised for a few minutes and moored up no more than half a mile from the marina near Bridge 136. We spent most of the day polishing, cleaning and of course painting. We did give some thought to continuing down the Grand Union into London, but as the weather was so lousy we decided against it. However, at Marsworth Junction we did decide to cruise up the Aylesbury Arm. It turned into a nice day as we cruised 6 miles and 16 locks through the beautiful countryside showing off its autumn colours. There was also lots of blackberries just waiting to be picked. The Aylesbury Arm is isolated and is one of the most peaceful stretches of canal in the country. It passes through modest farmlands with views of the Chiltern Hills to the east. All the locks on the Grand Union are double wide, but the 16 on the Arm are narrow locks. Because of all the heavy rain that we were having, the water was rushing over the top gates and they were pretty tough to open. You definitely had to stay as far forward as possible. We got to Aylesbury around 6 o'clock just before sunset. The nights were sure drawing in now. The duck that the town is famous for, the white domesticated Aylesbury duck, is no longer to be found, but there was a good selection of other breeds in the basin. During the night we kept hearing this tap 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 on the side of the boat as they picked away at the weed on our hull. Once again it was a bright sunny morning on Monday as we looked around town and picked up some groceries at Sainsbury's. We left around 10:30 and started making our way up the Arm. It's difficult to make out in this photo, but there are all sorts of ornate chimneys decorating this garden. It took us about 4 hours to make it back to Marsworth Junction, where we retraced our journey back up the Grand Union to just beyond the Seabrook Locks. We moored up by Ivanhoe Bridge and spent the rest of the afternoon priming and touching up the hull below the gunwale. Guess what? It started to rain and then it poured down all night. But we had a cosy evening by a nice warm fire. What a night! It belted down and continued rain, rain, rain all day. I read while Pat worked on the Butley can. By the way, it's nearly finished and it's looking good. The weather still looked unsettled around 4:30, but we decided to push on up to Grove. Things didn't look much better on Wednesday and I was beginning to get a bit concerned. It was becoming more and more difficult to know where the canal was, and British Waterways personnel were telling boaters to moor up because it wasn't possible to go through the locks. The next couple of shots will give you some idea of what it was like. Between Grove and Leighton Buzzard, the River Ouse and the canal were becoming one waterway. The water was flowing fast and it was very windy, not pleasant cruising weather. I was most likely down below, sitting by a nice warm fire having a wee droppy while Pet was doing all the steering. We did eventually make it to Leighton Buzzard and arrived just as it was getting dark. I think it may have been the Smugglers Pub by Bridge 144 where we had dinner and watched England get beaten by Holland on TV. We spent all of Thursday at the same mooring, did some laundry, got some groceries at Tesco's, and I continued to work on the hull below the gunwale. We also painted the mop handle to match the Butley can. Do you remember the rock salmon supper a few days ago? Well, we returned to the same shop and once again it was delicious. After supper we had a quiet evening by the fire listening to the radio. On Friday we cruised 14 miles and 6 locks up to Great Linford. We moored up here in 1985 when we were cruising with Len and Olive and my half-brother Malcolm and his wife Carol. Great Linford is well worth stopping to visit. The historic village is just a few yards from the canal and includes the Church of St Andrews, which was dedicated in 1215, as well as the 17th century manor house that's now a recording studio, and some very pretty almshouses. Okay, what am I doing here? Well, I'm reenacting what happened in 1985. Len tossed the boat keys at Olive, knowing she'd miss them and that they'd end up in the canal. He thought they'd float because they were attached to a large cork ball. Well, he was wrong. They sank to the bottom of the canal. Malcolm finally volunteered to retrieve them by going for a dip in the ice-cold water. On Saturday we cruised past Wolverton railway station where we'd said goodbye to the family 2 weeks ago. We ended up at Cosgrove Aqueduct. It got so cold in the night that Pat went to bed with a hot water bottle, and I even turned up the oldie heater. Up to now we'd stoke up the solid fuel stove and that'd keep us warm until the morning. Well, I think the cold night put an end to our flower garden. The cold front did move through and I was able to finish the paint job on the hull. Claire Justine looks just like she did when we met her at Brighouse. There were a lot of people walking along the towpath and a number of them stopped to say how nice she looked. In the afternoon we went through Cosgrove Lock very carefully, making sure we didn't scratch any of that new paint job. We tied off at the Navigation pub in Castlethorpe to await the arrival of our guests. It was Olive and Len returning for their 4th visit. Actually it was Len's 5th visit. We went over to the Navigation for dinner and then caught up on their news before turning in for the night. We had a nice leisurely breakfast and took off around 11 AM. We stopped at a boatyard to pick up an oil filter in preparation for the next oil change. It was a gorgeous day, blue skies and beautiful countryside, and Stoke Bruin locks were a perfect setting to take a few photographs. After going through all 7 Stoke Bruin locks, we moored up just before Blisworth Tunnel. We did find out that we had a lot of water under the subflooring and we eventually bailed out 7 buckets. It may have been the result of overfilling the water tank at Leighton Buzzard. Well, I had dinner on board and spent the evening playing Liverpool. On Tuesday morning, Len walked into town to get a couple of pints of milk before taking us through the tunnel. I promise, these are the last of the tunnel shots. As I mentioned before, this 3,057 yard long tunnel was the longest one open to navigation in 1993. It was another lovely day as we cruised up to Bugbrook. Pat and Olive walked into town to get some groceries and then we just relaxed on board. In the evening we continued our Liverpool tournament. It's Wednesday the 20th of October and Len is up early jollying up the fire so the lounge will be nice and toasty for breakfast. From the looks of what's on his head, I think there's going to be some kind of celebration today. Happy birthday to me. Look, a birthday cake with marzipan and icing. We had cake and trifle for breakfast. And I had lots of birthday presents. Our destination today was Wilton Marina. During our search for a narrowboat, we got to know Paul the manager, and I wanted to see if he was willing to list Claire Justine and at what price. After checking her out, he said he'd love to have a boat of this quality for sale in his marina, as it would attract customers. He felt she'd sell for around £40,000, but would list her at £44,000, and he'd only charge 2% commission. The normal was 7%. I told him that we wouldn't be leaving for the States until the end of the month, and that if we hadn't sold her then, we would return and sign an agreement. It was not hard to understand why Paul wanted to list such a beautiful boat that was obviously well taken care of by loving owners. Did you notice in the previous photo that the Buckby can was finished? Well, it does need a little bit of touching up here and there. I think Pat did a professional job painting it with traditional roses and castles. 18 years on, I still admire her workmanship when I look at it sitting on top of our piano in Reno. Do you remember what happened on the 10th of April? I doubt it. Well, that was when the tiller pin got bent at Ellen Lock. Look what I got for my birthday. A brand new Kingfisher tiller pin. On Thursday we went through Braunston Tunnel. See, no photos. Yeah, we moored up at Admiral Nelson for the 3rd time. Olive and Pat went into the village for groceries while Len and I did the oil change. We found out that the boatyard had given us the wrong filter, but Len was able to get the right one from Union Canal Carriers. We had dinner at the pub and a fun time playing bar skittles. On Friday, Peter and Judith met up with us at Nimrod Bridge 108 in Lower Shuckburgh. We drove back to get Len's car and dropped Peter's off at Croppedy, and then, back on the boat, we jammed as much of our gear as we could into Len's car. It was then time for Olive and Len to say their final farewell to Claire Justine and head off for home. We were moored in the middle of nowhere and had chicken soup and trifle for supper. We were up early on Saturday and cruised 12 miles and went down 9 locks to Fenny Compton. We tied off at the George and Dragon, where we had a mixed grill for dinner. It had lots of different meats and cost £4.95. This photo was taken the next day as we approached Boundary Lift Bridge. It had been a while since we'd gone through lift bridges. This one, like many on the Oxford, was chained open. At Broadmoor Lock we took one last guest photo and then cruised down to the pretty village of Croppedy, where we had Sunday dinner at the Red Lion. We'll return to this pub many times over the next few years. Croppedy was as far south as we went on the Oxford, and it was here that Peter and Judith said their final farewells to Claire Justine. This was their 4th cruise on her. They also left with a packed car, taking with them all the items we'd borrowed during the year. After bidding them adieu, we winded at the wharf and cruised back to Feeder Bridge 142. This bridge crosses a small feeder system and is parallel to the canal. We moored lengthwise across it. A number of years later I tried to moor in the same place, but it was very windy and I got in one heck of a mess. I ended up getting jammed across the canal and had to have another boat help me out of my predicament. We were underway by 7 AM on Monday. It was one of those memorable early morning cruises as we watched the sun come up over the horizon. It was so quiet, so serene. Here are a couple of shots of us going back through Boundary Lift Bridge. This is Tunnel Bridge with Fenny Compton Tunnel behind it. Okay, it doesn't look like a tunnel, but it was in 1776. It was always a bottleneck on the Oxford Canal, and in the early 1800s the canal company decided to open it up, and by 1870 it became a deep cutting. Okay, if that's what you want, I'll pick up my boat and go home. I must add that this was the only evidence of anti-Americanism that we saw on the canals in our entire journey. Here's Pat taking us down the Napton flight of 6 locks. These will be the last narrow locks we will go through aboard Claire Justine. I think I'm telling Pat that the farmhouse behind her is the Folly Pie pub, and that's the pub we were looking for. Actually, I believe it had closed down sometime before 1993, and it didn't reopen until a few years later. However, it would become one of our favourite watering holes in years to come. It was a long day of cruising, and we finally called it quits just above Braunston Top Lock. By now it was getting dark at 5 o'clock, and after some supper we turned in early. Now, we didn't take any more photos until late on Wednesday, but the next slide and my narration will tell you what happened after we left Braunston. Tuesday the 26th of October. It was an lucky morning as we went through Braunston Tunnel and down the Buckby flight. We arrived at Wilton Marina at 1 o'clock and then decided to cruise down to the wharf at Bugbrook for dinner. While at Bugbrook we had a phone call from someone who said that he'd seen our ad in the September issue of Waterways World and wondered if the boat was still for sale. I told him that it was, but that we were going to hand it over to Wilton Marina tomorrow and that the asking price would be £44,000. I did mention to him that if a sale could be finalised before we left for the States next week, we'd be agreeable to selling it for $40,000. He seemed interested and asked if it would be alright to look at the boat tomorrow at 10 a.m. Of course we said yes. After we put the phone down, we went mad polishing and cleaning and didn't get to bed till late. And then we were up at 5 a.m. on Wednesday, polishing more brass, wiping the paintwork down, scrubbing and cleaning. But by 9:30 we'd showered, dressed and got the fire going. It was nice and cozy inside the boat when Mike Guy, his wife Valerie and their 2 children arrived. After having a thorough tour of the boat, they seemed interested but wanted to discuss it privately, so went over to the wharf to have some lunch. They came back and said they'd like to go for a short cruise, which we did. I had to make a very tight turnaround and fortunately did it perfectly. I then let Mike take the tiller and I could tell he loved the boat. After returning to the wharf, he said that he'd like to buy the boat but wanted to have it surveyed and the bottom blackened. We talked about price for a short while, but he quickly agreed, subject to the survey being satisfactory, to pay £39,500 plus the cost of the blackening. Now the problem was, how were we going to get this done in the next week? We called Phil Gardner at Waterways Services in Wheaton, and then he said that he'd be able to do it alright, but he wouldn't be able to get a crane for another couple of days. Well, sometime around 4:30 he called back and said that he had a crane right now and that we had to get there right away. By the time we untied it was dark, and I have to admit that we covered the 4 miles in just over an hour. During this time Pat was frantically putting everything breakable on the floor and then called Phil to ask if we should put the fire out. He said, don't worry about it. We got to Waterway Services at 6 o'clock and Phil was waiting there with the crane. The only problem was who was going to pay for it. Mike had agreed to pay for the survey that included the crane out, but would I ever see him again? Not having much choice, I told Phil that I would cover the cost if he didn't show up. Well, now it's time for Claire Justine to be craned out. They put the chains around us, making sure they didn't touch the paint. Then they slowly lifted Claire Justine out of the canal. They gently put her down on the hard core with the fire still glowing brightly. We climbed back on board, had some supper and went to bed. It felt very strange being on dry land. On Thursday, Phil looked the boat over and said, in his opinion, it looked in perfect condition, but if the potential owner wanted to have a survey, he'd do it right away. I did think about taking that shiny prop home as a little memento of our adventure, but then decided that Mike might not go along with that idea. Mike and Valerie arrived later in the morning, looked at the bottom and said it was a done deal. That same day they made arrangements to wire transfer £39,500 to my account. I'm not sure if he went ahead with the survey, but he did have Phil blacken the bottom. They obviously didn't have any doubts about the transaction taking place because they brought along a bottle of champagne to celebrate the change of ownerships. We spent the rest of Thursday and all day Friday packing up all our belongings. We would wave at passing boats and tell them to slow down because they're rocking our boat. We walked to the narrowboat pub for dinner on Friday, and it seemed really strange knowing that tonight would be our last night aboard Claire Justine. We definitely had mixed emotions, relieved that we'd sold before returning home, but sorry we were no longer the owners of one of the best boats to cruise the system. Len arrived at 10 o'clock on Saturday morning and we started the arduous task of getting all our belongings into Len's car. Somehow we had to get all this, plus quite a bit more, into the car. But we made it. We did have to leave our rooftop garden for Mike and Valerie. One last look at the canal map. From the 2nd to the 30th of October we cruised 175 miles and went through 164 locks. And we cruised a total of 1,288 miles and went through 1,076 locks on our canal adventure. We spent the next week at Olive and Len's, and then on the 6th of November we returned to what seemed like a very large house in Reno, Nevada. We hope you enjoyed listening to the story and looking at the photos of our canal adventure in 1993. I'll end with one of my favourite songs by Billy Graham and the late Jeff Dennison. It's titled, I Know That I'll Be Back Again. It's from their album, Songs of the Waterways.
And I know that I'll be back again to cruise along the waterway, not caring where or when. There's no deadlines, no telephone, no reasons to pretend. And the only thing you need to know is what lies around the bend. Autumn moorings on the waterway with misty finger curls. The sun's a globe of scarlet under the clouds of tinted pearls. You cast off from your mooring point, ease gently to midstream. You know the world belongs to you and life is but a dream. The starkly painted locks appear like castellated walls. The clanking drawbridge paddles erase the bridges that enthrall. The moss-lined bricks move past your eyes, the lock gates open wide, and you ease into a different world on a sweetly moving tide. I know that I'll be back again to cruise along the waterways, not caring where or when. There's no deadline, no telephone, no reasons to pretend. And the only thing you need to know is what lies around the bend. The motor throbs beneath your feet, the tiller fights your hand. You're waked ripples in the reeds where statued herons stand. Kingfishers on sentry go above their secret pools, and zigzag off along the stream like crazy flying Jews. The old Kirk Bridge is turning your whispers into hails. Their modern square steel cousins, a canny motorway and a rail. They don't echo to the history of a rope-scarred brick and post, and cargoes carried on a sea 10 yards from coast to coast. And I know that I'll be back again to cruise along the waterway, not caring where or when. There's no deadline, no telephone, no reasons to pretend. And the only thing you need to know is what lies around the bend. Ghosts of industry long dead in the old parts of the town, through cracked and grimy windows on the waterways gaze down. Was it china clay from Cornwall? Was it cotton from the mills that was pulled by willing horses through the cuttings in the hills? As dusk falls on the waterways, you glide past moored up boats. From curtained cabins, happy sounds and merry laughter floats. You find yourself a spot to moor and cast your rope ashore. Tonight it's food and beer and chat, tomorrow so much more. And I know that I'll be back again to cruise along the waterway, not caring where or when. There's no deadline, no telephones, no reasons to pretend. And the only thing you need to know is what lies around the bend. There's no deadline, no telephone, no reasons to pretend. And the only thing you need to know is what lies around the bend.